Grab your shovels and dust off those magnifying glasses because today we are going on a digital dig. I want you to think of yourself not just as a player holding a sword, but as a literal archaeologist unearthing a deep, hidden narrative. We are diving into the absolutely fascinating, cryptic storytelling of a game that fundamentally changed how we think about world building. Dark Souls.
You know, if you spend any time at all on gaming forums, you've probably run into this exact critique. Dark Souls is a mediocre game with almost no story. It's a super common take, but as we're going to see today, it is also completely mistaken. People say this because, well, they're looking for a story in all the traditional places and coming up totally empty-handed.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this question is the absolute core of our mystery today. What if the story isn't actually missing at all? What if it's just intentionally buried beneath layers of ash, ruin, and total silence, just waiting for you to piece it together like a giant puzzle?
To really get this, we have to contrast it with standard video game storytelling. You definitely know the drill. Long cinematic cutscenes, detailed quest logs holding your hand, and NPCs just dumping heavy exposition on you. Dark Souls? It goes in the exact opposite direction. It relies on total silence. The characters you meet are mostly stoic or completely despairing. The game relies almost entirely on item descriptions in your inventory and super subtle environmental clues. It's this revolutionary silent form of storytelling, and it demands your active participation.
But before we can dig into the dirt and look at those tiny individual clues, we really need to understand the sheer epic scale of the universe we are exploring. Drawing straight from the comprehensive lore on the Dark Souls wiki, we have to talk about the grand canvas of this world, a world that is largely defined by the Age of Fire.
So, let's walk through this chronological flow. It's a massive, mythic lore that honestly goes completely over the head of the casual player. It starts way back with the Age of Ancients, an unformed world of gray crags, giant trees, and everlasting immortal dragons. Then, boom, a massive shift, the discovery of the first flame. This brings disparity, heat and cold, life and death. From the dark came humanoid beings who found these incredibly powerful Lord Souls within that flame. In Step 3, they used this newfound power to utterly defeat the dragons, peeling apart their stone scales and unleashing disease and fire, which ushers in the Age of Fire. But eventually, we arrive at the game's present setting, the fading flame. The fire is dying out, the gods are losing their power, and the undead curse is running completely rampant.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dense pantheon of the game's gods and instigators. You've got Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, whose lightning bolts literally broke the dragons. You have the Witch of Izalith, who tried to duplicate the flame but instead catastrophically created the twisted flame of chaos and demons. There's Gravel Lord Nito, the first of the dead, who commands disease. And then there is the furtive pygmy, a character easily forgotten, who found the dark soul and became the ancestor to all humanity. I mean, this is a sprawling Shakespearean tragedy of a world. And yet, when you actually play the game, absolutely no one sits you down to tell you this.
Which brings us to a truly brilliant essay from first-person scholar by Franziska Asher. Asher points out that in the cursed land of Lordran, storytelling doesn't happen in cinematic cutscenes. It happens right in your backpack. It's narrative through your inventory. The physical items you pick up, those are the actual texts of this world. Let's look at our first archaeological subject, a seemingly mundane cleric named Petrus of Thorland. When you first meet Petrus, he just seems like a standard, maybe somewhat dismissive holy man. He really doesn't tell you much of value. But if you pay close attention to the items he carries, specifically a copper coin he gives you, a whole new layer of his character completely opens up. Now what's really interesting about this is the item's description. Coins have absolutely zero mechanical value in this game. You pay for literally everything with souls, so why does this item even exist? Well, it betrays Petrus's desperate hidden delusion. He is carrying around a completely useless copper coin because he's holding on to this impossible dream of escaping the cursed land and returning to the normal world. It's such a tiny, tragic character detail, and it's hidden entirely in the description of a useless piece of inventory.
Let's move on to artifact number 2, the famous sorcerer, Big Hat Logan. This guy is a legendary figure in the game, a scholar from the Vinheim Dragon School, and he wears this massive, totally iconic hat. Now, in a fantasy game, you'd probably assume that a legendary wizard's giant hat is some kind of immensely powerful magical artifact, right?
Wrong! The hat's description explicitly tells us that it does not possess any special magic powers. He literally just wore it because he was famously antisocial and wanted to block out people's stares. Plus, first-person scholar points out the incredibly tragic literally past tense used here. The immense power Logan possessed came entirely from his own intellect and his own obsession, not from some magical clothing. You only get to read this description after Logan has gone totally mad imitating a dragon and you're forced to put him down. You are reading his history in the past tense, standing right over his body.
But just as you start getting comfortable reading your inventory to understand the world, we have to drop a massive plot twist into our dig. What if the items are actually lying to you? First-person scholar introduces this brilliant academic theory to the game, the unreliable narrator. In literature, this is a storyteller whose credibility is seriously compromised. Now, we usually assume video game menus are objective, right? That the game's interface is this omniscient, completely truthful voice. But what if the item descriptions in Dark Souls are actually just fragmented, biased rumors penned by fallible observers living in the world? What if it's all just speculation?
So, the crucial point is how the physical environment actually contradicts the written lore. Let's take Kirk, the Knight of Thorns. The text calls him a notorious Darkwraith, essentially a murderous servant of the dark. But if you look at where his corpse physically ends up, he's found deep underground, desperately guarding the ailing, suffering fair lady, a demon who absorbs pain from her followers. The text says he's a selfish murderer, but the environment strongly implies he's a tragically devoted servant trying to harvest humanity just to ease her suffering. Or take the Crimson Set Sealers. The text implies they stayed in New Londo to guard a flooded city. But the physical placement of Yulva's healing spell and corpse, it's found far away in the poisonous swamps of Blighttown. This tells us she probably abandoned her post to go try and heal the sick there. The game literally forces you to interpret the truth by comparing the text to the physical world.
And this leads us to a pretty dark yet profound realization: killing as world disclosure. In Lordran, if you really want to understand an entity, it often means you have to kill it.
The gameplay loop and the narrative loop are completely inextricably linked. You don't get to just walk up to a boss, ask them how their day is going, and read a lore book. First, you have to observe them and learn their every movement through deadly, brutal trial and error. Second, you actually have to defeat them in unforgiving combat. Only then, in Step 3, do you get to claim their soul, loot their armor, and finally read their tragic history in your inventory. You're basically like a biologist who has to dissect the subject to understand it, irretrievably destroying it in the process. When we synthesize the vast, tragic lore from the wiki with this brilliant narrative analysis, we really uncover the ultimate design philosophy of this universe. You don't just sit back and consume the story here, you have to absolutely earn the narrative.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because it completely transforms our connection to the character. Your traditional video game protagonist is a pre-written hero experiencing a destined character arc. You're just along for the ride. But the Dark Souls avatar, they are a blank slate, a hollow vessel. They only move forward through sheer stubborn perseverance. Literally, your perseverance. Because the avatar is a blank space, the emotional weight of unraveling this grand, tragic world falls entirely on your shoulders.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. In a world this completely hostile, if the gameplay demands absolute perfection and absolutely refuses to hold your hand, why should earning the story be any different? The story isn't missing. It is just waiting for someone resilient enough to dig it up. Keep digging, and thanks for joining us on this explainer.